Agrippina and Drusilla, an incestuous horror story. Agrippina waited until Drusilla was well past puberty to start her evil agenda, to claim the young woman as her doppelganger, and to drive a wedge between her and her father that would become an unbridgeable chasm. In service of this dark agenda, she gave her endless gifts, those she deserved, and those of a kind so appalling that no one should ever be subjected to them. When all Drusilla's friends would tell her, as they often did, that she was behaving like a vile, selfish piece of the purest shit, Agrippina would inevitably and immediately reassure her that she was perfect and could not possibly ever be at fault, no matter the situation, no matter the behavior. She would demonize those friends and assure Drusilla, with the greatest vigor and animation, that she was intrinsically guiltless and blameless, and that anyone who said a single word to the contrary, who dared to contradict the tissue of lies the two of them had created and now shared, was, by definition, a villain. In exactly the same manner in which Agrippina had negotiated her way through her own life, disparaging and blaming everyone but herself, be it her sister, her colleagues, and, naturally and above all, her poor, beleaguered husband, never having once uttered an apology to him in 24 years of marriage. Paragons of perfection have no need to ever apologize. What could possibly be more obvious? Mother taught daughter to hate men, as she did herself, as did her mother before her, and, one assumes, did all those matriarchs of the family who preceded them. Agrippina took particular care in teaching Drusilla to hate her father, above all, and with the most venomous vehemence, and to especially loathe him if and when he had the gall and hubris to request of her that she do a single goddamn thing for herself on her own, without her mommy hovering over her shoulder, without her mommy sitting beside her, helping her with each and every math problem, to write each and every essay in 12th grade, when one assumed, wrongly, that she would need be doing these sorts of things for herself only a year later in college. Needless to say, that was very far from Agrippina's agenda, and never to be the case. Her father's unforgivable sin was to suggest that she consider engaging in some bare minimum of introspection, in hopes of achieving some modest level of self-awareness, simply put, to make some nominal advance towards individuation. But perfect beings need neither apologize nor introspect. Anyone suggesting otherwise must necessarily be a wretched scoundrel of the first order, whom one discounts and demonizes, and from whom one estranges oneself in fear of potentially experiencing some even negligible encounter with reality, and if said scoundrel is ever spoken of again, it will only be with words and facial expressions dripping with contempt, words calculated to insulate the speaker from any skirmish with truths which would demolish the little house of cards in which she lives, and hence eviscerate her. Neither Agrippina nor Drusilla ever had a single curious bone in their bodies. Agrippina, the self-proclaimed legend in her own mind, the, in quotes, perfect mother, as well as, in quotes, wife, or so she would claim to her acquaintances, though it was never even remotely the case, does indeed possess a few qualities which can, at times, pass for intelligence in a vanishingly small subset of visual and practical domains. But she eagerly and happily plunges all that's left, which is 98% of her, into a swamp of tabloid television, corporate cable lies and misinformation, white trash romance novels, and on, the lowest dregs of a popular culture from which any even remotely thoughtful person recoils in horror. She has never read a work of literature unless it had been assigned to her in college, long ago. Drusilla was also forced to read a couple of worthy works in college, but did so only in order to brown-nose some teacher from whom she wanted a certain grade. She has never troubled herself with any such trivial matters again. And Drusilla, too, has that same infinitesimal, laser-like sliver of intelligence that her mother does. But when one considers the entire package, appears to be learning disabled, in point of fact, an actual moron. Neither of these miscreants has one iota of compassion for any living being other than themselves. But no one bears any blame for the cards they are dealt. Hence, Neither of them bears the slightest responsibility for that delightful character trait, one among a near infinite multitude of other awful character traits. For free will is the silliest of fictions. On second thought, though, let us amend that blame, no, responsibility, yes. And given that, one is then tempted to proceed in quite another fashion, to judge and to necessarily be appalled. For if these beings had even the most minimal capacity to choose to be otherwise, what can one conclude? Other than that they are the purest villains, that they are indeed monsters. Agrippina's and Drusilla's self-involvement and their over-enmeshment with one another are a thing of the purest horror. They exalt and acclaim one another hour after hour, day in, day out. It is the two of them against a detestable, malevolent world, against men, against the innumerable and ever-changing cast of villains who fail to recognize how irreproachable and extraordinary the two of them are. The poor father was forced to listen in a thoroughly nauseated revulsion for years and years to this Dr. Evil and Mini-Me show, forced to watch and listen as Agrippina actively created this catty, venomous clone, this heartless, narcissistic mannequin with no curiosity, no interests, no empathy, no sense of humor, who cannot think, wonder, or search within. For where, pray, tell, would she look? She stands in awe of nothing other than her own reflection, in which others see clearly what she does not, a gaping maw, a bottomless abyss, the soulless hunger of a vampire. How does one examine one's conscience when one has no conscience? Neither Agrippina nor Drusilla has a theory of other minds. People exist only as things to please, or as sources of either aggravation or of outright villainy. What they are, in and of themselves, is of no account. It's not even a question either of them would be able to formulate, much less consider. Other people are inert and dismissible, given that they don't possess any insides. They are dolls, inanimate objects, which either irritate or soothe. When the latter is the case, they are temporarily embraced, with a cacophony of absurdly over-effusive, transparently fake encomiums. That is, until they dare to do something unforgivable, such as having some interest or priority, which does not suit either their wishes or vanity. Kudos for this absolute masterpiece of cloning. But oh, the irony, Agrippina, the molecular biologist, who thought so intensely about such matters, and who quite spectacularly failed in her professional scientific life to achieve any of them, to now achieve this dream in life, to spit out of her vile, polluted womb this dead ringer, this narcissistic, vainglorious, self-involved, condescending, judgmental, cruel, selfish, perpetual victim of a world which will never appreciate her sufficiently. Could there be a greater existential perversity than this, that this dreadful thing now walks the earth in its mother's image? This child of the damned, now damned herself? Damned, yes, but not to suffer, because monsters do not, in general, suffer. It's only in others that they create anguish and grief. One can only assume that a slew of unseen, genetic, epigenetic, and purely biological factors traveling along her ancient, evil maternal lineage, in addition to all the obvious, easily observed, relentless environmental cues. All those disgusting Machiavellian manipulations and machinations, that all of this horror passed from Agrippina's vile mother, through Agrippina herself, to this 24-year-old monster, whom one can only hope will suffer some sort of trauma, some temporarily disabling psychological wound, a wound sufficient to awaken one or two potentially empathic neurons in what appears to be that pea brain of hers. Otherwise, this miniature Agrippina will wander the earth for another 60 years, busily creating shrines, monuments, and mausoleums to and for her mom, exactly as she did for her own loathsome mother, as did the mothers who preceded them, for who can imagine how long into the filthy, stinking mists of primordial time. The two of these creatures are a pair of poisonous, gangrenous, should have been barren spinsters, although they remain tragically fertile. Barren spinsters with a twist, in the presence of men, yes, but in a perpetual state of misandry. They have, on occasion, even condescended to occasionally fuck men. Agrippina even endured being fucked by her husband for a very brief period, clenching her teeth in hopes of creating a demonic crotch turd, a future harpy, whom she could mold into her clone. That was the agenda, the only agenda, right from the start, to create her beloved little mini-me. She never shared a bed with that husband, nor with any other man, as she had no embarrassment admitting. She's never actually been with a man, never given a rat's ass for who that man might be in and of himself, or for who anyone else is for that matter. No, that man, this man, each was but a prop, a temporarily tolerated appendage, a gullible, malleable mark in the husband's case, quite craftily chosen and manipulated in order that he might pour sperm into her at the appropriate moment, in order that she might have the opportunity to direct this nightmare play of filth with a next generation cast of one, whom she could direct and suffocate from a few steps off stage. Drusilla was somewhat cute until she was maybe 13 or 14, around which time the thing that is authentically her began poking its ghastly head and heart out from deep within her. It was like a series of too grisly to be included outtakes from Alien, scenes in which the demon, which had been living in her guts all along, began ripping through her flesh to reveal the god-awful beast within to the world, to anyone unfortunate enough to be anywhere near her, to her lovely former friends, whom she now happily ditched in order that she might sit proudly at the mean girl's table. This had to have been more or less the story with her own mother as well. And one assumes her grandmother, and it is reasonable to also assume a parade of ghastly evil hags stretching deep into the black mists of the ancient earth, perhaps to the common ancestress of man and monkey, perhaps beyond their agendas being to suck a man down into a black vortex, a deep well. And in Agrippina's mother's case, kill that man at 62, but only after ripping from his loins one or more children, no matter the cost to him or to the world. What that man is, in and of himself, never mattered to any of them. Nor will it to Drusilla, who seems to have already located a victim, a potential sperm donor, whom she can wring out and discard once used, just as her delightful mother did. Nor did it ever matter. And Agrippina's acquaintances, her so-called friends, of whom she in truth has none. She has had a few people that she has called friend momentarily, but here's a surprise. They always manage to predictably and inevitably betray and disappoint her. How? By being unwilling to recognize how perfectly extraordinary and beyond criticism she is at all times. By not recognizing how they should simply worship her, humbly genuflect, do her, and only her bidding. Act only in the ways in which she has led herself to believe she deserves, ways she can manipulate to her crafty, deceitful advantage. One is tempted to fantasize the two of them getting in a car and driving off a fucking cliff, but not in any sort of dignified or meaningful way. There will be no Thelma and Louise eulogies for either of them. Rather, because they've simply stopped paying attention to the road, because they couldn't shut their freaking mouths long enough to stop singing each other's praises, each blabbing on and on about how wonderful and flawless the other is, about how the rest of the world, especially its male population, is an undependable, treacherous, and demonic rabble. In this pleasant dream, the two of them end up in a frozen hell, in which they are entombed in ice, paralyzed and unable to move except for their mouths, which will continue to jabber, lips flapping wildly like demented seals, flattering and fawning over one another, while cursing all those thoughtless and foolish enough to insufficiently extol and celebrate them. Two nightmarish mouths, frozen for all eternity in an orgy of self-pity, delusion, grandiosity, and hypocritical expressions of love for one another. Needless to say, it is no such thing. Love is unknown to either of these creatures. Neither one of them loves the other, or ever could. They love only what the other does for them, as an extension of themselves. For most folks, this would be an unimaginable nightmare. For the two of them, it would be business as usual, not hell at all. It would be paradise, to be lost in a flaming Gothic hall of mirrors, which reflects only the chattering, flattering mouths of the mother and of her incestuous, tit-sucking accomplice. This, for them, would be a sort of ecstasy. And when they are gone, in this dream, which must, sadly, remain only a dream, the father will be finally rid of the both of them, the banes, the scourges and curses of his existence, the vampires who sucked his blood and gnawed his heart for 28 years. In this dream, the father is never forced to endure the grisly sight of Drusilla pumping some new fiend out of her polluted womb, some brand new pestilence upon the planet, some fresh, squawking, spoiled, ghastly, loathsome hellcat, most likely. Perhaps, prior to the denouement of this delicious dream, Satan will pull the two of them from the ice and nail them to opposite sides of a pole on a more than a little gruesome, yet simultaneously utterly hilarious shish kebab type skewer, then suspend them both over a roaring flame, thinking it a form of additional punishment. One can hope that is still, presumably, allowed. The only problem with this initially delightful and most heartwarming fantasy is that neither mother nor daughter is likely to be disturbed by it in the least. Not if their heads and perpetually blabbering mouths are able to still function, to proceed ever onwards with their perpetual, filthy windbag, bloviating sermons and panegyrics, their laughable myth-making of themselves and of one another. That their bodies would be roasting to a crisp would be but an inconsequential annoyance. Those blabbering pairs of lips and mouths, blaming, demonizing, and all the while simultaneously pitying and praising themselves to the skies, would carry on for all eternity, unless and until those lips and mouths fell to the ground in cinders, in ashes, at which point they would more than likely find a way to keep coughing up their abominations. It matters not what Satan does with or to them, so long as others are not forced to set eyes on either of them again, or for the husband to listen to any more of the garbage and foulness he had been made to endure for 2.5 decades, those landfills of toxic venom, endless blasphemies against all that is good and noble in this world, the unrelenting and constantly regurgitated filth perpetually spewing out of their vile, polluted, yammering mouths. Witches, burn, hellcats, freeze, as long as the rest of us are left in comfort and in ease.